The Daylight Limited. It was well known in the town of San Luis Obispo that the Holden family loved trains. Every afternoon when they heard the train whistle, they would stop their chores to watch the Daylight Limited thunder along the tracks. Mr. and Mrs. Holden would wave at the engineer. Tuck and Billy would chase the sleek orange engine until they fell down exhausted. Chief wagged his tail so hard that it looked like his backside was going to fall off. "There's something about a train that makes a person feel alive," Mr. Holden would say. One night, Tuck had a dream that he was riding in a train car made of glass. "I saw mountains and sky all around me," he told his family. "It was like being in a huge moving window." Mr. Holden always listened carefully to his children. "I think you've got an idea there, son." Mrs. Holden, who had an artistic flair, drew a picture of Tuck's dream train car. It had a great domed roof made of glass and comfortable chairs where a person could watch the world whiz by. Mr. Holden, who loved to tinker in his workshop, studied his wife's picture. "I'm going to build that," he said. Mr. Holden spent many days and nights constructing a perfect model. Tuck helped, asking questions and offering ideas. "Let's call it the Tucker," he suggested. "That's not fair," said Billy. "I want a train car named after me, too." "How about the Chief?" said Tuck. Chief wagged his tail heartily. "Too late," said Mr. Holden. "There already is a train called the Chief." "I think we should call it the Dome Car," Mrs. Holden said simply. She had a way of getting to the heart of the matter. When the model of the Dome Car was finished, it was like a real train car in every way. The wheels turned and the doors opened, the windows arched up to the sky, and inside were chairs that swiveled. There was even a cord that the crew could pull to sound whistle signals. 2 short blasts to go forward, 4 short blasts to brake. Tuck and his father proudly showed their invention to the engineer of the Daylight Limited. "A train car made of glass!" the engineer chuckled. He held his sides and laughed so hard he popped a button off his overalls. Mrs. Fernandez, who worked at the ticket window, didn't laugh. Instead, he showed Tuck and Mr. Holden a poster on the station wall. It said, "Visit the Invention of Tomorrow contest, June 26, 1939, at the New York World's Fair." "You should take your invention to the World's Fair," she suggested. "It's a place for big ideas." "The Invention of Tomorrow," said Tuck, his eyes shining with excitement. "That's perfect. We'll win the contest, and then everyone will know about our dome car. We'll be famous." "Tuck, you must be dreaming," Mr. Holden said. "This is America," Mrs. Fernandez smiled. "Everyone is entitled to dream." The Holdens took a vote. It was 5-0 in favor of entering the contest. "This is fine and dandy," pointed out Mr. Holden, "but New York is all the way across the country. How will we pay for the tickets?" "I'll sell my comic books and catcher's mitts," said Tuck. "I'll sell my gold locket," said Billy. "I have a few dollars I've been saving for a rainy day," said Mrs. Holden. There was still only enough money to buy 2 tickets. It was agreed that Tuck, Billy, and Chief would stay behind with Cousin Ida. Mr. and Mrs. Holden would ride the Daylight Limited to San Francisco, where they would pick up the overland route to New York. At the station, the family stood silently waiting for the train. From a distance, they heard 4 short blasts of the whistle. They all knew what that meant. The Daylight Limited was putting on the brakes and coming into town. Mr. Holden took Tuck and Billy in his arms. "I want you both to remember something," he said. "No matter how far away your mother and I are, we'll always be just on the other side of that whistle." Mr. Holden gave his children a long hug. Mrs. Holden blew kisses. Billy and Tuck did not stop waving until the train was out of sight. Cousin Ida arrived that day. She wore sensible shoes and had a rule for everything. She made Brussels sprouts for dinner and put starch in the sheets. She insisted on baths but would not allow whispering after the lights were out. Cousin Ida had no use for fun. When Chief brought her his rubber ball to toss, she locked it in a drawer and said, "Who does it think I am? Babe Ruth?" Tuck checked off each day on the calendar. The Invention of Tomorrow contest was 5 days away. "If only we could be there," Billy sighed. Outside, Tuck and Billy could hear the Daylight Limited approaching. The sound of the whistle made them think of their mother and father. They knew that somewhere on their way to New York City, their parents were thinking of them too. The next day, Cousin Ida went to the train station to pick up a package. "You children are to wait for me on the platform," she said. "No wandering away, no unnecessary giggling, no teasing or wrestling, no buying of candy or kicking of cans." Cousin Ida turned to Chief. As for you, she said, no barking, no biting, no scratching, no whimpering, no anything. Satisfied that the rules had been laid down, Cousin Ida disappeared into the depot. The Daylight Limited was stopped in the station, sitting on the tracks like a snake sleeping in the sun. The smell of food floated from the dining car. Chief sniffled. There was steak in the air. Chief loved steak. He jumped from the bench, bounded across the platform, and leapt onto the train. Tuck and Billy ran after him. Chief dashed through the dining car, following his nose to the kitchen. Who do we have here? The chief smiled. I'm sorry, mister, Billy said breathlessly. Our dog smelled food. He must be hungry, said the chief. I was just whipping up a little dinner for Gypsy, Miss LaRue's dog. There's some left over. Loretta LaRue is on this train? Asked Tuck, his eyes opening wide. She was the most famous movie star in Hollywood. Could I have her autograph? Miss LaRue has a private car all the way at the end of the train, said the chief. She doesn't like visitors. But she's Tuck's all-time favorite star, said Billy. It would mean so much to him. The chief scratched his chin. I'll make you a deal, he said to Tuck. If you promise not to be a pest, I'll let you deliver Gypsy's dinner. At least you'll get to see Miss LaRue. Tuck grinned and shook the chief's hand so hard that he finally had to ask Tuck to stop. With Gypsy's dinner in hand, Tuck and Billy were heading to Loretta LaRue's private car when the engine suddenly shot out a cloud of white steam. All aboard, the conductor called. Next stop, San Francisco. Billy, the train is leaving, exclaimed Tuck. Another blast of steam rose up. The train lurched forward. Oh, said Billy, we're moving. Billy grabbed Chief and they tried to get to the exit, pushing their way through the crowded parlor car. The train picked up speed. The clickety-clack of the wheels grew louder and faster. Tuck looked out the window. The station was far back in the distance now. Up ahead, he could see the pine-covered mountains that ran along the California coast. Looks like we're going to San Francisco, Tuck said. Billy giggled. This was definitely against Cousin Ida's rules. Loretta LaRue's name was written in gold letters on the door of her private car. Tuck knocked. Billy and Chief waited in the shadows. Who is it? Came the throaty voice from inside. I've brought Gypsy's dinner, said Tuck. The door flew open and there stood Loretta LaRue. Thank goodness you're here, she said. Gypsy was getting very cranky. Come in. Loretta sat down on a red velvet chair. Put the bowl near me, she said to Tuck. Gypsy doesn't like to eat alone. Loretta looked out the window as the Daylight Limited chugged up the mountain pass.